In the kingdom of Veyrath, where wolves walked as easily as men, every Omega was known by their scent. A scent could tell a story before a single word was spoken. It could show strength, gentleness, health, and above all, it could show whether a soul was fit to be claimed by an alpha. Leora had no scent at all. From the day she was born, the healers had leaned over her cradle and frowned. They passed her from hand to hand, sniffing at her skin, her hair, the soft blanket wrapped around her small body, and found nothing. No trace of lavender or rain or firewood smoke, the kinds of markers that told others who a child might grow to be. There was only silence where a scent should have been, and silence frightened the pack more than any threat they could name. They called her the Hollow One. The elders whispered that the moon goddess had forgotten to finish her, or worse, had marked her on purpose as a punishment for a wrong not yet committed. When the harvest failed 2 years in a row, fingers pointed at the girl with no scent. When a fever swept through the eastern homes, someone remembered that Leora had walked past those doors the week before, and that was enough. She grew up on the edge of her pack's territory, in a small house with a crooked door, learning early that the safest place to stand was out of sight. By the time she was a young woman, she had stopped expecting kindness. She kept her head down, did her work, and told herself that being invisible was its own kind of safety. If no one looked at her, no one could blame her. She did not dream of an alpha's claim the way other Omegas did. She did not imagine a mate at all. She simply hoped to be left alone. That hope ended on the morning the selection ceremony was announced. Every few years, the great packs of the Black Ridge Alliance sent their unclaimed Omegas before the Alpha King, so that he might find the one whose scent called to his own. King Kaidan Thorn had sat through 15 years of these ceremonies without once showing interest. His court called it patience, his enemies called it weakness. Behind closed doors, his advisors called it a crisis, because a king without an heir was a kingdom without a future. Leora's pack elders saw an opportunity. If she stood before the king and was rejected, as she surely would be, it would prove once and for all that she carried no worth, no scent, no soul mark, nothing that connected her to their people. They could finally send her away without guilt, so they dressed her in a plain gray gown, gave her no comfort and no advice, and pushed her toward the front gates of the king's hall as though she were a burden they were relieved to be rid of. She did not want to go. She stood at the edge of the courtyard until an elder gripped her arm hard enough to bruise, and told her that refusing was not a choice she was permitted to make. So she walked, because walking was easier than being dragged, and she told herself it would be over quickly. A king would look at her, feel nothing, and turn away. She had survived worse. The hall was enormous, filled with candlelight and the low murmur of 100 conversations. Omegas from every allied pack stood in careful rows, each in her finest clothing, each hoping to be the one whose name would be called. Leora stood at the very end of the line, half hidden behind a marble pillar, and watched as one Omega after another was presented to the king. Kaidan sat upon a high seat at the front of the hall, his expression unreadable, his eyes distant. He had done this so many times that boredom had worn a groove into his patience. Beside the throne, invisible to human eyes but felt by every wolf in the room, his beast lay curled and silent, as it always did. 15 years of Omegas, and not once had it lifted its head. When Leora's turn came, she almost did not step forward. An attendant had to nudge her gently, and she walked the length of the hall with her eyes fixed on the floor, wishing herself smaller than she already felt. Then something changed. Kaidan straightened in his seat, as though someone had struck him. His breath caught. Deep inside him, the beast that had slept through 100 ceremonies surged upward with a force that nearly took his legs out from under him. It was not a scent that woke it, because Leora had none to give. It was something older, something the court had almost forgotten existed. A soul recognizing its other half, without needing a single outward sign to prove it. Kaidan rose from his throne. The hall fell silent. He walked down the steps, past his stunned advisors, past the rows of Omegas who had spent years preparing for this exact moment, and stopped in front of the girl everyone else called cursed. Then, in front of the entire court, the Alpha King of Black Ridge dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled through the hall. Leora froze, certain she had misunderstood, certain this was some cruel trick arranged by her pack to humiliate her one final time before casting her out. But Kaidan's eyes, when he lifted them to hers, held no mockery at all. They held wonder, and something close to disbelief. "I have waited 15 years, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall, for a bond I was told might never come. I did not expect to find it in someone the world tried to make invisible, but my beast knows what it knows. You are my mate." The words landed like thunder. Whispers broke out immediately, sharp and disbelieving. Someone in the crowd called it a trick of witchcraft. Another voice suggested she had cursed the king himself, using whatever dark power had stolen her scent in the first place. Leora's own pack elders stood frozen at the back of the hall, their plan to shame her collapsing into something far stranger and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Kaidan did not lower his eyes from her, even as the noise grew around them. "Whatever they have called you," he said quietly, "only for her, it was never the truth." In the days that followed, the palace became a battlefield of whispers. Leora was given rooms far grander than anything she had ever known, silk sheets and warm fires, and servants who did not know whether to bow to her or watch her with suspicion. She hardly slept. Every hallway she walked, she felt eyes on her back, heard voices drop to murmurs the moment she passed. Kaidan's cousin, a sharp-featured alpha named Draven, made his opposition clear from the very first evening. He had spent years positioning himself as the natural heir should Kaidan ever be found unfit to rule, and a king bonded to a girl with no scent, a girl the world called cursed, was exactly the kind of unfit he had been waiting for. He did not attack her outright, he was too careful for that. Instead, he planted doubts like seeds, suggesting to the council that a true soul bond had never once appeared without a scent to prove it, that perhaps the king had been enchanted rather than chosen, that the kingdom's stability could not rest on something so unnatural. Leora heard these words secondhand, passed to her by the few servants brave enough to warn her. She did not defend herself, because she had spent her whole life being told she had no right to. Instead, she began to withdraw, retreating into old habits of silence and invisibility, until Kaidan found her one evening sitting alone in the palace gardens, staring at nothing. "You do not have to hide anymore," he said, sitting beside her without asking permission, the way only someone certain of his welcome would. "I do not know how to do anything else," she admitted. "My whole life, hiding was the only thing that kept me safe." Kaidan was quiet for a moment. "My beast did not choose you because you were safe to choose," he said. "He chose you because when he looked at you, everything else in the world went quiet. That is not something a curse can do. That is something only a true bond can do." She wanted to believe him. Some small, frightened part of her had wanted to believe someone, anyone, for as long as she could remember. But belief did not silence the court, and it did not stop Draven from calling for an inquiry into the nature of her bond, demanding that the old records be searched for any bloodline that matched hers. It was in those old records that the truth was finally found. Buried in a sealed archive, a scholar loyal to Kaidan discovered a record of a suppression working laid upon a young Omega woman 2 decades earlier, a woman who matched the description of Leora's mother almost exactly. The working had been placed not as punishment, but as protection. Leora's mother had come from a line of true soul-bonded Omegas, the rarest kind, the kind capable of forging unbreakable alliances between packs through their bond. A rival house, fearing what such alliances might mean for their own power, had hunted these bloodlines nearly to extinction. To save her unborn daughter, Leora's mother had accepted a suppression that stripped away all outward scent, hiding her completely from those who would have come looking. She had died before she could ever explain why, and the truth had been buried along with her. Leora had not been cursed. She had been hidden, deliberately and lovingly, by a mother desperate to keep her safe. When this was brought before the court, Draven refused to accept it quietly. In one final, desperate move, he stood before the assembled nobles and announced that even if the story were true, it changed nothing, that a suppressed bloodline was still an unnatural thing, still something that had no place beside a king. He demanded the suppression be broken publicly, certain that whatever emerged, cursed or otherwise, would finally end the matter in his favor. The council, uncertain and frightened, agreed. What none of them expected was what the breaking of the suppression would reveal. The moment the working shattered, torn away by ceremony, and by the truth finally being spoken aloud, Leora's scent broke free for the first time in her entire life. It rose through the hall like something long held under water finally allowed to breathe, warm and clear and undeniably real, a scent so strong and so unmistakably matched to Kaidan's own that even the most doubtful nobles fell silent. There was no mistaking it. No enchantment could counterfeit something so complete. The beast within Kaidan rose fully to the surface at last, and before the entire court, he claimed her without hesitation, sealing the bond in a way that could never again be questioned. Draven's plan had not exposed a fraud. It had freed the truth he had been trying to bury. He was stripped of his title within the week and exiled from Blackridge territory, his ambitions collapsing under the weight of the very ceremony he had demanded. Leora's former pack, disgraced by their treatment of a true soul-bonded Omega, and by their attempt to use her humiliation for their own gain, lost their standing within the alliance entirely. The elders who had once called her cursed now found themselves cast to the edges of a world that no longer wanted them. Leora, meanwhile, stood where she had once believed she would never belong. On the night of her coronation, as Moon Queen of Blackridge, she walked out onto the palace balcony beside Kaidan, the crowd below finally seeing her not as a hollow, cursed thing, but as exactly what she had always been underneath the fear and the whispers. A soul rare enough that even a beast that had slept through 15 years of ceremonies had known her the instant she walked through the door. Kaidan took her hand as the cheers rose around them. "They called you cursed," he said softly, "because they never understood what they were looking at." Leora smiled, and for the first time in her life, she did not look away. "Then let them understand it now," she said, and together they stood beneath the moonlight that had, in the end, always known exactly who she was.